Clerk, please read the roll.
Avedisian. Buell.
Here.
Caban. Camilleri.
Here.
DeBella.
Here.
Galligan. Gardeau.
Here.
Hall. Healy.
Here.
Hoffman.
Here.
Holloway. Iono.
Here.
LeBeau.
Here.
Lester.
Here.
Magnan.
Here.
Murata.
Here.
Osgood. Payne.
Here.
Patel.
Here.
Salemi.
Here.
Salomonides. Sweezy. Taylor.
Here.
Torres. Vecino.
Here.
Carrier. We have a quorum.
Okay, please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Item number 4. Item number 4, approval of the minutes of the meeting of February the 21st, 2000. Are there any additions or deletions? Rich?
Extension, that's all.
If not, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions?
Extension.
One abstention. Item number 5, public comments relative to agenda items. Report from the district chairman. Yeah, just like to discuss this evening a piece of legislation that we have at the General Assembly and discuss the logic and rationale behind it. And Chris, is Chris, where's Chris? Chris Stone? Okay, can we move on to, we'll come back to that. Report from the Chief Executive Officer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll be brief. I just want to remind everyone, as you know, we are in the process of building our consent order, consent decree, CSO, SSO tunnel. The tunnel was broken into 5 components, 5 bid projects at the request of the state of Connecticut DEEP. We have, we're in the middle of our tunnel contract 2. That was approximately $300 million. We tried in 2016 to get the state of Connecticut DEEP to commit to the grant and loan components for the remaining contracts 3, 4, and 5 to no avail. They had given us a letter that basically promised that we would be a priority, but they could not commit to funding. They had indicated they could not commit the state of Connecticut to these contracts. So here we are, ready to bid contract 3, 4, and 5 within this year, and contract 5 was planned to be bid in February. Our expectation was that we were going to receive $13 to $14 million in grant for that contract. And the state DEEP has told us, and the state treasurer's office has confirmed, that the state of Connecticut DEEP only has $8 million for purposes of contract 5. So we are in the position where we have to actually wait. They have told us they're trying to get more funding allocated through the bonding process. As you know, the bond commissioner did not meet in January, did not meet in February. We are not sure if it'll meet in March. It usually meets in the last Friday of the month. So we'll be in a precarious situation where we have to decide and request EPA to give us an extension of time if there is no bond commission hearing in March. We have seen that the governor's budget does include $75 million for 2 years for clean water funding, but as we know that will not get approved until June and July. So we're waiting with bated breath to figure out whether or not there's going to be any funding for Contract 5. So that's extremely important, and as I mentioned, I met with the Treasurer's Office, the new treasurer, to tell them that the anticipation for Contracts 3 and 4 and 5, our expectation was to receive $70 million in grants for those 3 projects. The total of the contracts was about 130 to 135 million. If we do not receive that $70 million in grants for those 3 contracts, our special sewer service charge will go from $4.10 this year to $6.40 next year. The anticipation of actually receiving that grant money would have, there will only have been a 50-cent increase. So there's a significant impact to our ratepayers if we do not receive that grant money. So we're waiting to find out whether or not there will be a bond commission hearing and will there be monies put aside for the MDC. I'm not going to get into too much of the Colebrook Reservoir issue tonight because there's an agenda item, so we can talk about it there. I would just say that there is a Water Bureau meeting on March 13th, and we are going to get into some. Tonight, we're just going to talk about the hydro and the decommissioning of the hydro units at Colebrook. On March 13th, at the Water Bureau, we're going to talk more specifically about the regime flow and the flow to the river and our charter requirements as it relates to wild and scenic and the watershed towns. I haven't told you this, Commissioner, I'm sorry, but Mr. Chairman, but we need to appoint a commissioner to the Hogback Commission, and the commissioner that was appointed to the Hogback Commission was Kate Kowalshin, and she is no longer here. So I believe we can make an appointment on the 13th. Okay.
Would you explain to everybody what
Yeah,
the
I'm sorry.
commission is?
So as part of the Allied Town Agreements, which was developed obviously in the 30s, 20s, 30s, and 40s, it was amended numerous times. But the intent was basically that it all had to do with recreation in the West Branch. And so, in order for us to do anything, to change anything in the Colebrook West Branch area, a Hogback Commission was developed, and it was, although it's not really a legal entity that exists, it's something that we follow as a matter of administrative practice because our charter actually defines what our obligations are to the allied towns, the watershed towns, but we still like to follow it. And the Hogback Commission includes all of our watershed towns, DPH, DEP, obviously the MDC, and a number of stakeholders within the Farmington River watershed. I believe the National Federal Wildlife is part of that group. So we have one commissioner that's appointed to the Hogback Commission that represents the MDC Commission. And so we'll need someone that's appointed for that meeting. So the plan will be to review the decommissioning of the hydro tonight. If that's approved, we would like to immediately set up a Hogback Commission meeting with those stakeholders and start to talk. We haven't formally addressed this issue regarding exiting the agreement with the Army Corps in Colebrook and the releases from the Colebrook to the MDC's Goodwin Dam as of yet. So we'd like to start that discussion through a Hogback Commission meeting. And the We did finally receive the sewer user charge study, and it has been sent out to all the member towns. It was sent out on the 26th of February, and so we are scheduling a meeting with the town managers and finance directors to review any questions and concerns they might have. And we did meet with the town, we've talked a lot about the town of West Hartford. Did Chris Stone come back?
Yeah.
Okay, this might be a segue into it, Mr. Chairman. We did meet with the town of West Hartford Engineering Department on February 5th, 2019, to talk specifically about the MDC's responsibility under the consent decree to disconnect storm private inflow drainage from the homes to the MDC sewer system. So we have a verbal commitment from the town that they plan to work with our staff and prioritize projects in April to identify projects like 4 Mile Road and Greenhurst where the private inflow from the homes will be disconnected from the homes and directed to a new storm pipe in the street, which the town pays for. But the town has indicated they haven't identified a funding source. So we're mandated to comply with the consent decree, which is to remove inflow and infiltration from our system. And we're trying to work with the town of West Hartford and all the towns to make sure that that occurs. So with that, Mr. Chairman, do you want to talk about the legislation?
Yeah, we have legislation that has been submitted to the General Assembly and is right now in the Planning and Development Committee, and it articulates, MDC has no authority relative to storm sewers, and what it does is it addresses that issue, and it talks about a process that MDC would be willing to request authorization for in its charter, and Chris can outline the bill and what's happened to it, because this is a critical issue. It's not one town. There's several of our district towns that are not in compliance with the whole question of storm sewers and storm sewer capacity, which is having a major impact, as our Chief Operating Officer just pointed out, relative to our ability to meet our consent order. In the event that we don't do something in that area, when EPA comes in and there isn't compliance here, I don't want to be on the other end of that as the MDC being fined, because that fine will be passed on to all members of all the towns in the metropolitan district. It's not MDC. MDC is an extension of the 8 towns. We're a nonprofit governmental agency, and consequently, that fine will be absorbed by all of our ratepayers. And what we're trying to do is prevent that and to come up with a system that those towns that do have that problem can deal with it. So we've got a piece of legislation, and I would like Chris to discuss what the status of it is and some of the complications, because we discussed this in the government committee, and I think it's a very significant issue and should be discussed at the full board. So, Chris, why don't you articulate or outline the legislation and
Sure.
What it does, and I guess there's been a proposed amendment and some of the controversy around
go through all that.
the
Sure.
whole issue.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I apologize for stepping out earlier. We have, the MDC has submitted draft legislation, it's Senate Bill 971, which we went over during the government committee meeting, and I'm prepared to discuss before the full board. 971 does 2 things. It amends our charters in 2 different ways. One, as it relates to bonding, which is a relatively non-controversial proposal, which would bring the NBC, a specially chartered municipality, in line with every other municipality in the state of Connecticut which enjoy certain options under their bonding programs. We would enjoy the same options. And if you want to go into detail, we can on that. But the real, I'll say
I don't think that's the main issue.
for lack of a better, well, I just would,
Let's go to,
for lack of a better term, the more controversial part of the proposal was sections 2 and 3 of 971, which relate to creating the authority, not the mandate, but the authority of the MDC to form a stormwater management authority or function within the MDC. Presently, we do not have that authority under our charter. It is merely enabling legislation which would allow us to create that function. It would not, however, mandate that any town or the entire NDC membership turn over their stormwater systems to the MDC. It's merely there to create an option for those municipalities who choose to, through a vote of their legislative body, to do so. Initially, in terms of how this legislation evolved, initially it was a proposal to where the MDC was mandated to form this stormwater management authority. It was modified in our initial proposal to a permissive as opposed to mandatory provision, and it's been further modified and shared with our member towns to require not only permissive language on the part of the MDC, but also to require a vote of the legislative bodies of any one or more municipalities within the membership that wants the MDC to assist in stormwater management. So it really provides, at this point, a tool for our municipalities rather than an authority or a power enjoyed by the MDC, but a tool for our member towns to deal with stormwater issues. Now, how does that benefit the MDC, and how ultimately may it benefit the member towns? As to the towns, many have ordinances presently which prohibit the introduction of stormwater or clean water into the sanitary sewer system. So certainly would help in enforcing their own ordinances. Secondly, there's a train coming down the track known as the MS4 rules, which deal with the collection, treatment, and disposal of stormwater. All municipalities within the state are going to be called upon eventually, sooner rather than later, to deal with stormwater in a more proactive way, not just taking the stormwater and dumping it into a river, stream, or other tributary. Stormwater will have to be treated to a certain standard before it's disposed of into the environment. So it pretends to be a very costly initiative by EPA and administered through DEEP, and this Stormwater Management Authority could assist our towns in addressing that. As to the MDC, what you'll see up on the screen, you're going to see 3 slides of certain areas in West Hartford. And it's not to single out West Hartford. There are other towns that have similar problems. But in West Hartford, because they have expressed a concern with the underlying bill, and legitimate concerns with the underlying bill, we called out sections of West Hartford that show a significant amount of inflow and infiltration. You've heard the term, when we talk about the Clean Water Project, the term I&I. Inflow and infiltration is stormwater, clean water, groundwater, getting into our sewage pipes, either through compromises within the pipes or through direct connections through roof leaders, sump pumps, et cetera, and other ways that people, homeowners, purposely dispose of their stormwater into the sanitary sewer system. In effect, what that becomes, unlike in Hartford where the CSOs, the combined sewers, are permitted, it becomes de facto a combined system. You see on the map, this is West Hartford Area 29, as we've described it. There are certain, it's very hard to read, and I apologize. The white or non-colored homes are homes in which we found that there's no infiltration into the sanitary sewer and no suspected infiltration into the sanitary sewer. The green portions, the green shade indicates properties that we have confirmed discharge stormwater, groundwater into our sanitary sewer. The red are what is called under the table there, suspected areas or suspected properties in which groundwater, stormwater goes into our system. Our experience is that 90% of the properties identified in red has suspected, historically throughout the town of West Hartford and other towns, in fact, are connected into the system. The reason why we label them as suspect is because we haven't been able to either access the home and get real metering data, but they do have indications of or evidence of connections. There's a roof leader coming from the gutters into a spout that has not been identified, has not been dye tested to confirm that it goes into our sanitary, but it's evidence of a connection. There's some pumps, evidence of a connection, but they haven't been dye tested, so we don't know if they actually discharge into our system. So there's certain indicia of connections. I will tell you that in this area and the two other areas that we found, again, 90% will be confirmed as connections. What does this do to our system? When you put in stormwater or groundwater into the system, it takes up pipe capacity. It becomes a combined sewer. And by taking up that pipe capacity with clean water, you obviously reduce the pipe capacity for sanitary sewage. When you have a rain event, and the flows from West Hartford, for example, go from 8 million gallons a day on a dry day to upwards of 60 to 70 million gallons a day during a rain event, it taxes the system. We do not have the capacity in the pipe. We don't have the treatment capacity, and it causes backups. And it causes backups in people's basements, onto the streets, into businesses. So that's what we're trying to avoid. And quite frankly, that's what we're mandated by EPA and DEEP to eliminate. Under our consent order, consent decree, there's specific references to I&I and what we have to do to reduce the I&I component that's taking up our capacity. And failure to comply will result, as the chairman pointed out, the potential for fines that are going to be paid by everybody, all of our customers. As it sits now, we've offered a possible solution at the option of the municipalities. We need to do all that's possible to try to address the situation without being faced with either fines from DEEP and EPA or without going back to trying to get a consent order or consent decree modified, which is a very difficult task. So we put this proposal together. Mr. Jellison has been talking with our member towns for months, if not years, about the stormwater issue and the effect on our system, both within the city of Hartford and outside the city of Hartford, in different ways, but same effect, taking up capacity in our pipes. So we're concerned about it. We have this proposed bill that has generated some controversy within our member towns who were concerned about, and rightfully so, about whether this was an MDC grab to gain more authority to do things beyond what is already provided for in our charter and take over what is otherwise a long-standing municipal function. That's not the case. And again, their participation would be triggered by a member town, not by the MDC. It's up for a public hearing on Wednesday before the Planning and Development Committee. I know that at least two of the towns will be offering testimony. I'll share the testimony with you prior to Wednesday by email, and I'll be more than happy to answer any questions which you might have.
Chris, are you saying when the bill was submitted, it was supposedly to be submitted as an option and not as a mandatory piece of legislation?
That's how it was submitted, using the optional language may. But in fairness to the towns that have voiced the concerns, it could use some clarification. It was never intended to be mandatory,
okay,
but it could use some clarification.
The point I'm making is the Legislative Commissioner's Office apparently wrote it differently than it was proposed.
It needs clarification.
And it needs,
and I've drafted language.
Shall or will is.
Well, it not only went from
Shall or may,
it always contained the may, the permissive language. But what wasn't clear was while it's permissive or permitting the MDC to develop this stormwater management authority, if they did, it wasn't clear what the next step was. It wasn't clear whether if the MDC used its option to form the authority, did that automatically mean that each member town had to participate in that process? And participate meaning give up their stormwater treatment and management authority to the MDC. That was the part that wasn't clear. We've drafted an amendment, Mr. Chairman, that will make that clear, that the only way that the MDC could exercise that authority is if a town asked them to.
But wasn't the word "shall" in there on the
Well,
initial?
long before it was ever submitted to the Planning and Development Committee, we had drafted, the original draft was shall,
Yeah, okay,
and we changed it to may.
okay. There questions? Commissioner?
Is Hartford in compliance with the CSO, with the combined sewer?
They're a
overflow?
combined source.
Well, there's the difference between Hartford and the chairman just pointed out, that in these communities outside of Hartford, there were what are called SSO communities, sanitary sewer overflows. They're supposed to have a separate system for sanitary sewers and a separate system for stormwater. In Hartford, they are, like many urban communities in the state, New Haven, Bridgeport, Waterbury, to name a few, they're permitted combined sewer entities that are the authority over which has been delegated from the EPA to DEEP. So SSOs are EPA, which is why we have the consent decree with those 7 communities through EPA. Hartford, a CSO community, delegated state. DEEP controls it. We have a consent order with DEEP. The SSOs, the CSOs in Hartford, we need to address the overflows from the CSOs. So we're doing that in several ways, as you know, through separation projects, by creating that additional pipe in the street to handle storm, through increasing the treatment capacity down in the South Meadows from 8
That's what's going on in the city
to
now.
the tunnel, to the south tunnel, and to what has been proposed with our third revision to the long-term control plan, or phase 3 of the long-term control plan, which is an integrated plan to move forward with those projects on a more, on a longer time frame, more cost-effective, and prioritized so that we get the biggest bang for our buck. So that's Hartford, and to date, we're in compliance.
If I might just add, Mr. Chairman, under our long-term control plan and under the consent decree, upon EPA and Connecticut DEEP's approval of the initial extraneous flow remedial plan, the MDC is required to implement this extraneous flow remedial plan in accordance with the schedule. The problem that we have, and the reason for this legislation, is that while we could disconnect rain leaders and sump pumps from our sewer system in the towns that are not combined sewer, we do not have the ability to build a stormwater sewer in those towns. So where's the water going to go? And you can't just pour the water onto the sidewalks and the streets. So we're caught between a rock and a hard place here. We have a schedule and an implementation order, and we don't have a manner in which to either force the homeowners or the towns to comply with that. So we're eventually going to get to a point where we're out of compliance. So this is not something that we can just sort of hope will go away. You can see from the draft here, I mean, that's the Morley School area in Fern Street, and almost every house is dumping its water into our sanitary sewer. So, and when you have that type of flow, it eventually affects the Hartford system. So something has to be done here. We can't just put our head in the sand on this and hope for the best. So if it's not going to be if this bill is not going to be passed and we can't take care of it ourselves, the towns are somehow going to have to address this, and it is an enormously expensive and complicated problem to the hundreds of millions of dollars range. So, you know, this is another reason to have an integrated plan and to take time and careful planning so that we do not bankrupt the municipal towns that are parts of our group here as we try to comply.
Questions? Okay,
Thank you.
thank you.
And I'm done.
You through?
Yep.
Okay. Okay, item 9, I'm sorry, Bart?
Yeah, I just have one thing to report, Mr. Chairman. I know that the commission has been very interested in the progress or lack thereof that we're making on the landfill. I do have a meeting scheduled tomorrow at 1 o'clock with the Attorney Clark, who is the governor's attorney, to discuss this very issue. It has been a little bit difficult to schedule, given our two schedules, but we are meeting tomorrow at 1 o'clock. And I will report back the results to the commission.
Okay, item number 9, Committee on Organization, consideration of impossible action regarding appointment of the interim chief financial officer. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Moved and seconded. Commissioner Taylor?
This was approved unanimously by the Committee on Organization. The candidate addressed himself to the committee, and we have had several very positive reports to him, including one by one of our commissioners. And the gentleman sits there.
Chris Martin?
Chris Martin, could you please stand for us, please? Thank you.
So Chris comes to us with more than 30 years' experience in the financial and banking industry. As Commissioner Taylor had mentioned, I had spoke with Commissioner Hall, and I think she is on the phone, and she had nothing but great things to say about Chris. She had worked directly and has worked directly with him for a number of years. Also, Town Manager Phil Schenk, who everyone respects from Bloomfield, had worked with Chris for more than 20 years. So lots of great things to say. Chris actually represented, he reminded us in our organizational committee that he actually worked for us as part of our banking team here at the MDC. So Chris has, his most recent employment was working directly with the MDC as the deputy treasurer, has been with the deputy treasurer, the treasurer's office for 18 months. So he's been working directly with our bond counsel for all of, or the majority of our recent borrowing. He has extensive knowledge of our needs. He has extensive knowledge of the bonding market, the rating agencies, in the process. And we have Adam Cray. Adam, I asked Adam to come along with Ernie Larmer, who they've been working with us and strategizing regarding our bonding, and we're actually strategizing as we speak to talk about possible refunding and banding and bonding over the next few months. So, Adam, if you would just kind of stand up and say a few words, I'd appreciate that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners. As Mr. Jellison said, my name is Adam Cray. I think you've all seen me before you in the past. I'm a director with Hilltop Securities. We're your financial advisor for bond and debt-related matters. As Mr. Jellison said, I worked with Chris while he was in the State Treasurer's office. Knew Chris before that, and there are a number of folks in my office that have worked with Chris and known him for decades. I think with the small piece that I do for you, which is debt-related, your bonds, your bans, any refundings, what's most important about Chris is that he is known in the bond world, and he knows finance, he knows debt, and he knows the MDC. Where this will be really helpful is projecting the fact that the MDC is having a smooth transition here. You're bringing in someone who knows you, who knows the bond world, and the rating agencies know Chris. And certainly the unknown, fear of the unknown is always the hardest thing to get over with the MDC, with the rating agencies. I think we all experienced that with Hartford. A lot of that was educating the rating agencies. So the fact that there will be less of a fear of the unknown since you're bringing in a known quantity will certainly be helpful, especially since, as Mr. Jellison said, we're already planning on what we will be bringing to you over the next couple of months with respect to the new money needs for your ongoing capital improvements, as well as a refunding we're looking at for your 2010 bonds. And as you know, my favorite thing to do before you is to come and tell you how we think we can save you money by doing a refunding. So as we work on strategizing the most efficient way to issue any new money you need plus a refunding, which would really be doing them together, saving your cost of issuance by doing one bond deal that takes care of both sides of that equation, certainly bringing in someone who can hit the ground running without a long ramp-up period would be very helpful. If there's any questions I can answer, please just let me know.
Are there any questions? Thank you very much, Adam.
Thank you, Adam.
If not, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. Welcome aboard, Chris. Item 10, Audit Committee consideration of and possible action regarding whistleblower policy. Rich?
This was in front of the Audit Committee earlier tonight. There was an amendment, and the amendment carried that this affects the employees of MDC only, not contractors and subcontractors. And it was unanimously approved
As amended.
as amended.
Questions? If not, all those in favor, please, I'm sorry, I just asked, it's been moved and seconded. If further discussion? If not, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Item number 11, Water Bureau, consideration and possible action regarding decommissioning Coldbrook River Dam hydroelectric facility. Is there a motion? Moved and seconded. Discussion? Scott, I just got one question. We had looked at putting hydro into our transmission lines that
Right.
come down from the reservoirs. Have we stopped pursuing that issue, or is that?
No, we're actually in the process of, we started a project last year or 2 years ago. We actually were awarded clean energy credits for that, so the project is almost complete. We're commissioning that project as we speak.
Does it make any sense to keep this in function? Is there?
We do have Alex from engineering here to talk about it. We're more than happy to answer any questions, but the long and short of it is, the system was built in '84. It's at its useful end of its life. The payback period, it's anywhere from $3 to $6 million for the investment, depending on what options. All 4 options is a 50-year payback. So the system that's operating today is only 34 years. We're talking about decommissioning. So if you have a project that's going to take 50 years to pay back, you'll be paying it back well before it's ready to be replaced.
So it was considered.
Right, it was considered. It is not a viable solution. The cost of energy, when we started the project in '84, we were making 21 cents per kilowatt hour. Today, we're making 3.9 cents per kilowatt hour. But if there's any questions, Alex, more than happy to answer any questions.
No questions? Rich?
When it's decommissioned, is there maintenance after the fact that we have to do with the facility?
So there's a number of things we have to do. Besides the physical decommissioning, there's a number of regulatory issues we have to deal with in terms of our FERC license. We have to work with FERC to actually exit out of our FERC license. We also have to decide with the Army Corps how much of the infrastructure is going to remain. For example, there's a crane there, which we use, Alex had a picture of it, we use to lift and lower the turbines. The Army Corps had indicated they might like to keep the crane. So we got to work out some of those details in terms of what remains, because whatever remains, MDC does not want ownership of it, because otherwise we'll have to pay property tax on that equipment. Alex in his presentation mentioned that the hydro units themselves cost the MDC $70,000 a year just in personal property tax for the town of Colebrook.
Okay, thank you.
Not, if there's further discussion? If not, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay.
Thank you, Alex.
Item number 12, personnel pension insurance consideration of and possible action regarding amendment of job specifications. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Been moved and seconded. Mr. Taylor?
This was an amendment to two job specifications relating to the chief operating officer and chief administrative officer. This was unanimously approved by the committee.
Are there questions? If not, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Item number 12, number 13, opportunity for general public comment. Commissioners' questions and comments. Buddy? Bud?
Thank you. I have a question and a comment. So the question is, with respect to some of the issues with the bond commission that we've heard of, I mean, I know there's two that have been postponed or canceled or whatever. Is the Glastonbury land proposal still an active proposal before the bond commission? Is that still?
It is.
So it just hasn't been put on the agenda, but it's still actively there, it's, you know.
Yes.
Is there anybody from the district or Glastonbury that's following up on this thing that's, you know?
We just re-signed a one-year option with Glastonbury in the last couple of weeks.
I did meet, Commissioner, I did meet with the town manager last week with the PFL legal counsel to talk about a couple of issues. The town of Glastonbury is still interested and still committed. They want to buy the property. So the issue, they had committed, the MDC has, as you know, spent a lot of time trying to get this monies put on the bond commission hearing. The town of Glastonbury committed that within the next 30 days, they would go to OPM and the governor's office to push their support of the sale of the property to the, from the MDC to the town of Glastonbury. So we're waiting, they committed to do that within the next 30 days.
We still expect that if and when that happens, that it'll have a very positive effect on the pension fund, because that's the.
No, it's gonna have no effect.
I thought it was,
The value is carried at $12.5 million. You'll get
I thought the value was, I thought right now,
No,
I thought the value was only, was set at much less than the 12.5 at the.
no,
when
it's carried right now in the pension at approximately $12.5 million.
It doesn't.
It wasn't
have to have
originally.
an impact.
It was carried originally around $3.2
Yeah,
million.
okay.
Yeah.
And if it doesn't happen, it will have an impact.
And we had an offer from Glastonbury, we also had another offer, so it's being carried at approximately $12.5 million right now.
The
Point was,
benefit,
if it doesn't happen, then we're not gonna be
If it
able to.
doesn't happen and we go out to sell it, it does not have a good effect.
It won't have a good impact if it doesn't happen. It will have,
That's what I meant.
it will have a positive impact relative to the total pension if it is affected.
as long as the pension and the value of the land continues to increase and the pension increases, there's no impact to the MDC. The sale of the property for a value close or similar to what we've asked for, the value of the 12.5, there is a positive impact as the market goes up. You actually see, if you had cash in the pension, you'd actually see a benefit. When the market goes down, you actually see a reverse benefit by having the land in the pension. So there is a benefit to having the cash in the pension fund versus the land as the market goes up. But if the market stays and the value of the land stays at 12.5, there's no impact to the MDC.
Well, if it actually happens, it also has a benefit that we aren't paying taxes on that piece of property.
Right.
That's right, that's
Mr. Chairman?
one of our tax towns in Glastonbury. So I do have a quick comment, too.
Is there a question on this, Commissioner?
In the public...
Hold on, but what's the question?
Well, my
Is it still about Glastonbury, Al, or
Yeah,
what?
about
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
yeah, I guess my question is, for the moment, if Glastonbury fails insofar as the bond commission is concerned, are we going to come up with an alternative mechanism for disposing of the property
I think you
if
said-
Glastonbury wants to buy it? I mean, are we going to
That was
try
the-
to work out some kind of accommodation
That
there?
was the discussion that they had with the town, when was it,
Correct.
last week?
Last week, that we,
Discussion at PP&I subcommittee, pension subcommittee, which is, I think, Friday?
yes.
It's Friday, next Friday. I'm also gonna be making a motion that we direct our attorney who represents us for the pension, that he sits down with Glastonbury and has over the next 3 months to negotiate a payment plan for them to come up with the money. And if they don't get it through bonding, it can be X amount up front, which they've approved in referendum,
Can you talk about that?
and maybe over a couple of years they pay us. But I'd like to see the cash in the account, not carrying it at 12.5 million for another 3 years. We're gonna carry it for 3 years. We haven't made a dime. Last year, we made 13% on the pension fund. If you were carrying it 10, that's $1.3 million gain. So it's not doing us any good sitting at the land. So, you know, I'd like, Jim to-
We'd have to go into executive session as we continue to discuss this. This is the negotiation. There are negotiations going on right now, so, go ahead.
All right, I just got a comment. And so in your package on the news, 2019 news tonight, is a story I hope that everybody saw about Massachusetts City agrees to clean up pollution it's been sending to Connecticut River and Long Island Sound. So this is the city of Holyoke. And this is really only the second major urban center that's going to have a clean water project. That's my understanding. I don't know if it's going to be funded the same way ours was. I'd be interested in seeing how it gets funded, if it, gets funded by water customers or by how, and Massachusetts doesn't have a DEEP. Massachusetts has the EPA that works from them. So I guess this agreement is directly with them.
Well-
I'm not sure, but it said that we've been talking to them. about it.
Holyoke Massachusetts is not a delegated state, so there is a DEEP.
It's the,
But they're regulated by EPA Boston. So DEEP Massachusetts does and is engaged in the process, but the regulator is the EPA, not the state.
So they have a consent, is this a consent?
A consent decree,
with
yes.
them,
Yep.
directly with EPA in Massachusetts? for
Correct.
that?
further questions? Ray, I'm sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Alan, I'm sorry.
That's all right. Thank you. So I've got a question, just not to take a position, so to speak, but there's been a lot of discussion, and I know that there's continuing conversation at the Capitol regarding bear hunting. I wonder, first of all, if MDC has a policy currently that either prohibits or allows, I'm guessing prohibits, and if in fact we might have that discussion, again, I'm not suggesting going one way or another, but just to open that conversation.
Deal with EPA on
Yeah, so bear hunting is illegal in the state of Connecticut and illegal for anyone, even if we're a landowner. So we have met with the state bear experts, and I can't remember his name. Jimmy, what's his name? Yep, see, Jimmy knows everything. And so we met with them way back, back in 2008 and 9, when we were actually having, if you remember, the bear chased the gentleman through West Hartford filter, and he shot at the bear, if you guys all remember that. So, right, so the bear population in Connecticut is growing tremendously, and, but they do not allow bear hunting. So we met with this gentleman, and he told us that the rest of the New England states think that Connecticut's crazy. Because if you look at what happened shortly thereafter, one of those bear, ran into a woman's home in West Hartford and ran through the screen and attacked their dog. So we cannot sanction, we cannot allow bear hunting, but there is, and they've been talking for years, Commissioner. Connecticut's been, most of the people within DEEP would tell you that we need a bear hunt, but it's more of a social, political issue rather than a common sense issue. There's a tremendous number of, the only time DEP will put a bear down, they actually tag the bear, and there's different colors, and if the bear becomes a nuisance twice and aggressive, thank you, they will put a bear down. You can't relocate a bear, the bear will come back.
And the other reason they don't hunt bears is because sometimes the bear wins.
Yes.
Sometimes the bear eats you.
Further questions and comments? Other business? Is there a motion? Stand adjourned without objection.